Welcome to Design Minded, coming to you from 99.1 WQRT LPFM Indianapolis, a program that explores how design impacts our physical environment and quality of life, sometimes for the better, sometimes not. I'm your host, Lee Alig, an architect and developer with collaborator Steve Mannheimer, an artist and professor emeritus of informatics at Indiana University, Indianapolis. Scott Travis joins us today, bringing an architectural perspective to the evolution of retail development from the 60s until now. He graduated from Ball State University School of Architecture and early on worked with architects Browning Day, eventually at White Lodging Hotel Development and multifamily developer Buckingham. Currently, Scott is Vice President of Development for Simon Property Group, specializing in architectural services. Welcome.
Thank you. I was actually hired about 7 years ago by Simon to lead development of hotels and residential projects on our properties. Generally speaking, Simon would partner with a developer who had that skill set. In the last 10 years, it's been an initiative to bring that skill set into the building and do it ourselves when it makes sense.
I also just wanted to mention that you were chairman of the not-for-profit board of Indianapolis Museum of Contemporary Art.
That is right.
Which kept you in the streets downtown on Friday and Saturdays. Good time, though, right?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. We got pinched like everybody else did during the COVID period, and funding was tough to get, and so made a decision to basically close the doors on the organization, but had a lot of fun and met a lot of great people.
Yeah, no, thank you for being a part of that. I remember it fondly, and I know working in the not-for-profit world is not always as rewarding as you wish it would be. So let's talk about your expertise today. And, market interruptions and changing trends have definitely been the primary driver of the last 20 years for the retail industry. Can you give us a brief history of traditional retail in the U.S.? And
I think there's some nuances to malls that people don't really understand, and that is when a developer turned 100 acres of farm ground into a mall. The mechanism, the way they got that done was they basically built an interest to the anchors, so Sears, JCPenney, Macy's, whoever it was, and enticed them to come and be a part of the mall. We'll almost like build it for you, and we'll charge you very little rents to get you to be the anchors, because what Simon's interested in general terms, is the stuff in the middle. It's everything between the anchors.
It's the barbell.
It's the inline retail. And so, generally there's 3 to 5 anchors on most malls. And those anchors, they've gone through the same turbulence that everyone else has in retail. And what everyone's come to learn is that, there may be room for 1, 2, 3 malls, but there's not room for 3, 4, 5 in every market like there was before. Those that have the strength stick behind. And we've seen closures here in Indianapolis. It's not uncommon across the country. Simon over time has acquired and disposed of properties, and so we're generally the A plus or the A, A mall.
At one point it was like a horse race. I mean, you had DeBartolo and Simon, and everybody in the country was trying to drop a new center in.
So when I get involved in a project is when we have 4 anchors and one of them struggling and they want to close the store, and they ultimately decide not to renew their lease and close. It's not just 200,000 or 300,000 square feet of big box retail square footage inside. It's the zoning associated with that, which means you got a 15-acre parking field that belongs to that retail. So if you don't replace that retail with the same amount of retail, you're going to generate land because you don't have to have that many parking spaces anymore. And then zoning has changed and they're getting lighter and lighter on parking requirements. So when that 15-acre parcel comes available, there's an army of people at Simon that look at the stuff. And at the end of the day, if the highest and best use for that 15 acres is retail, then that's what we're going to do because that's who we are. But when retail isn't the highest and best use, or we don't have enough bulk retail to replace that, then we start looking at other options. And so that's when the multifamily, the hotel, office components become discussion points. And when and if that highest and best use is residential or hotel, and we're going to do it on our own account, then that becomes my project, essentially.
So in simple terms, American malls are struggling. The top 25% of them aren't struggling, but the bottom 75% might be. And one solution is not to replace a failing retail anchor, but to turn that into
a mixed-use development. Yeah.
And what would that mean? What's a mixed-use development?
So mixed use, in very, very simple terms, is you have multiple asset classes blended together. So it's residential over retail, or it's residential infused in redevelopment opportunity where they may share a plaza together. They may share certain amenities together. It depends on where it is and what it is and how integrated we make that. In some cases, it makes sense to make it very isolated because it's on the periphery of the site and it wants to kind of get a little bit of a distance for what it is. It's funny because when I was at Ball State, talking now 25, 30 years ago, there was this incredible desire to see mixed-use transit-oriented developments, the TOD.
What does that mean? Act like our audience may not know.
So transit-oriented development is a development that is set on a hub of sort of intertwining transportation. So it's a train station, or it's a bus transfer station, or it's a, it's really where do people get on and off these mass transit elements. Developers would offer millions of dollars to have a subway station on their block in DC, contribute that just because of the generation of people that walk out of the subway station. They're right there. So you have point of contact. And if you think about a mall, malls were built starting in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 80s, in very, very bleak areas with very little, it was cheap ground. You go to the flat spot on the periphery of the city and build a mall. As time evolves, these malls are places that, the city, the federal government, everybody thinks I need to connect to that. So they build the highway exits. They build that's going to be the bus stop, and then it's going to be the train stop, and then it's going to be X, Y, and Z. And at the end of the day, it's kind of like a natural transit-oriented development instead of trying to manufacture it like a lot of developers have to do. And then the other side of it is what makes a mixed-use development vibrant is if there's a place there, right? You got to create a place. And so, for example, when I was at Buckingham, we did Cityway. We were creating a place where there was nothing there. So we had to create an energy and
refresh my memory where Cityway is.
So it's just north of South. That's an old reference to the first name we had. It was called North of South. And you wouldn't believe how many people came out of the woodwork to tell us that Cityway was a bad choice. We should have stuck with North of South. But South in Delaware. And,
it was the YMCA.
The YMCA was part of the development, which is actually why we dropped the name North of South, because we were now South of South with the YMCA. It was disingenuous to be North of South. So creating a place, a story, there's something, you try to embed these things or brand new developments to have a place or a sense of place. Well, a mall already has that. It's the place where your mom and dad took you the first time. It's the first movie theater you went to. It's probably where you bought your first girlfriend's ring, at the K Jeweler or whatever it was. I can't tell you how many times when I talk about a mall that I'm working on up in Seattle, where the residents, 25 years old or 80-year-old, tell me their connection to that mall. So it already has a sense of place. It's already a transit-oriented development. So it's a natural place for us to do what we're doing in terms of expanding the palette to beyond retail.
Now, you're talking about redevelopment of
Yes.
of these sites. That's almost like, you won't even recognize it when you're done, right?
Right.
You're knocking out all the primary department store spaces. And
yeah, what we would normally be involved in is one anchor redevelopment on a site. There's a unique situation where we had a mall on the north side of Seattle I mentioned before, and this mall, it was struggling in every way, shape, or form. And it was honestly, it's the first mall that was ever built in the United States. And so, we took a good hard look at it, and there really wasn't a way to do it kind of a little bit here, a little bit there. That was a complete decimation of what was there was the mall. So we took 42 acres of a 55-acre site and demolished it. Took a JCPenney, a Macy's, and a Nordstrom out. And so we're in the process of redeveloping that now. And so we went through a very exhaustive entitlement process to redevelop that. And so we're allowed to build 1 million square feet of office, 1,000 apartments, and 2 hotels. Fortuitously, we were able to provide a site to the Kraken when they were seeking out their franchise. So they got the expansion franchise, the new Kraken ice team for the NHL. And part of that program is they have to develop a 3-sheet ice facility that's open to the community as part of what the NHL requires. And so we were able to have that in the very center of our
What does
project.
that mean? 3-sheet ice.
So there's 3 full-size competitive rinks that you could play hockey on. One is really the teams, and that's where they do their practice. And then there's other intramurals, high-level skaters that play on that at different times of the day. Then there's more of a community ice rink in the middle, and then there's kind of a lessons only. You see figure skating training, 20 different kids out there with coaches. But this place is alive. It's 5:30 in the morning. It wakes up, and people are on the ice until 12:30 at night, all 3 sheets.
Cool, so to speak.
Yeah. 32 degrees, right?
Philosophically or programmatically, how have these malls really evolved? The ones that were built in the 50s, tried to create arcades and courtyards and brought fountains to the suburbs to draw people away from downtown areas or wherever else. I'm thinking of the big department stores.
Sure.
They're all anchored downtown. Best analogy for Indianapolis might be Glendale. So, Ayers and Blocks at the time were only downtown. They came out to Glendale. The center was pretty much built around them. And time passes and everything jumps up to 86th Street.
Yeah, it's not unlike offices, right?
Right.
If you went to work in an office 50 years ago, you went downtown Indianapolis. If you went to work 20 years ago, you probably went on 465 off-ramp, somewhere on the periphery. And so it was this move to where the people wanted to live. And unfortunately, that meant taking everything out of the core of these downtown centers. And so I think, Indianapolis has managed to bring a lot of that back.
It seems like it's trending in reverse a little bit. I mean,
sure.
You can't just keep growing north forever, although we're seeing development in Noblesville and Westfield, of course.
Yep.
But not of the same scale. I mean, you're going back and doing redos of other major centers.
Yep.
And obviously, an effort was done to bring retail back to downtown Indianapolis, and that is now being rehashed,
reimagined
for the third time with a different company. And I guess I just wanted to know what you think, where it's trending. All the factors in place, the internet, people's habits, people's needs, the social component of it all. And then obviously it's much more physical. I mean, you've got the fitness companies that are very much part of this.
Yeah, I see.
What's it look like?
I'm not a retail guru. I happen to work at Simon, but that's not the lane they hired me to be in. But being around it enough and paying attention to what's going on, it's as simple as, does Indianapolis need 5 malls like we had 20 or 10 years ago? Probably, no. The answer is no. Does there need to be more than one Apple store? Probably not. And if that Apple store is going to pick a mall, it's going to be Keystone because of where it is geographically and the customer base and, the region that it sits in. Those malls that are in the best position will survive and have. I'd say not will, because I think that we've already seen the correction, if you will. Maybe there's still, some that still need to maybe go away. I don't know. But we've seen a huge amount of retraction, right? I think that's over with. There was an article written in the Wall Street Journal a couple of years ago, maybe more. It was called The Halo Effect. And it was an interesting article in that the question is, will brick and mortar retail die because of the internet? The answer is no. People still want to walk in and touch the fabric. People still want to talk to an associate. People want to try things on. But the article was about Untuckit. Untuckit was a shirt company based in, I think, New York. One guy started the company, and it was pure online, and it was only online for years. And what they did was they experimented with, what if we did have a store? And so they put a store in one of our malls. That store, by opening its doors, created 30% more retail sales online for Untuckit. Meanwhile, they were making tons of sales in the store itself. So that halo effect of people do want to see the store doesn't mean they're not going to buy everything at the store. They'll probably buy 80% online and 20% at the store, or 50-50, depending on their habits. But they want to know that there's a store that they can walk in and talk to somebody.
So this is a message to the entire industry. I mean, obviously they're seeing this as as the model.
Yep.
You see some people leaving the malls, but then they're going to freestanding or inline type of centers.
It's like the Restoration Hardware is a good example. They've, for the last decade, they've really focused on creating what they call the mansion. It's the standalone building, whether it's adjacent to the mall or it's by itself like we have here. Those are really unique. You did see a lot of luxe brands that wanted to go out and have their own storefront in like boutique part of town, and it's going to be a very high end store. It's a dedicated store. You walk off the street into it. We've seen a shift of that. They want to come back to the mall. The traffic that goes through the mall to see other things.
It's the same people.
But it's also a little bit of a reaction to some safety, right? If you're in the mall, you're protected by not just your front door and your windows, but the mall itself. It's not unknown that there's still smash and grabs. Even on Michigan Avenue last week in Louis Vuitton, somebody drove a truck in so they could steal bags.
Wow. I missed that.
Yep.
So what developers are really trying to do is create a live, work, play
That's right.
environment, a
Yep.
destination, someplace where people can go and they can work out and they can eat
Yep.
and they can shop and pretty much spend the day.
Yeah, you think about Keystone, it's a very attractive to an empty nester. They got their 5-bedroom house on the golf course. They don't need it anymore. They want to downsize. They want to have a place down in Florida, but they still want to have a landing pad here in Indianapolis. So they might rent an apartment at Ironworks because they still have their favorite shopping habits. It's right across the street. They've got, Bruce Chris downstairs. They've got things at their fingertips. And frankly, renting is 30 years ago, it kind of was like you rent. That's like a negative to you. Now it's like, well, of course I do. Why would I pay property tax and mow a 2-acre lot when I when I don't want to? Right.
Right.
Do you think all this is going to change when all of us baby boomers drop dead?
No, I think it's a logical thing. We're just being logical about it, right? We're just making sense of it at our ages. I don't see that changing. I think future generations will see it similar.
Well, you think about kids in their 30s. They don't want to live out near Keystone at the Crossing. They want to live downtown, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they definitely want to rent, but don't they somewhere in the back of their mind, and I'm just speculative, so it's a question, somewhere in the back of their mind thinking, yeah, I'm going to do this until I get married. And then as soon as the first baby is born, we're out to the suburbs.
Yeah. I think there's always you're going to move to where you want your kid to go to school, right? And where it's safe to run around in the neighborhood and not, run the risk of, getting hit by a car or something because it's quieter. Those are no-brainers. That's just what's going to happen. But
how is that going to impact your industry?
I think, we're probably how many generations of people have been going to the mall, when my kids still go, their kids are going to go.
3 generations easily, maybe 4, depending on how you count a generation.
Sure.
But is it still that third space?
What we're doing with this redevelopment and infusing other uses, we put a hotel in our Dadeland Mall location or Sawgrass Mall location. They're insanely popular destinations for foreign travelers to come and shop. Those 2 malls in South Florida. They stay at our mall. They go in. The first thing they do is buy 5 large bags at the luggage store, and then they fill it. And then they leave after staying 2 or 3 days. The mall is a natural attraction for a lot of reasons. And if you could live nearby or on the property, or you could stay there, I think that just feels more normal now than it ever has been.
Back in the day, really back in the 50s and 60s, when people were beginning to talk about what malls were, one of the analogies that I remember is that a mall was like the village green that didn't exist anymore.
Sure.
And so the social function, people say, well, people want to go shop. Of course they want to go shop, but shopping in and of itself is only part of the total experience of being on the village green and seeing your friends, especially if you're like 13, 14 years old and just got out of school and you want to hang before you have to go home.
Yep.
Is that still, a driving motivation?
Yeah, I'm certain of it. I can't tell you the number of times I've gone to the mall with not a design, planned agenda, right? I just want to go and see if there's something I might want to pick up. I think it's fairly common. And to your point, social space, it is. It's one of the very few community centers, if you think about it, that is open to the public, and you will likely see someone and if you go to Keystone, as an example.
Well, and that's an excellent point. Very good point. I don't know if you've ever read a book called Bowling Alone. We hear a lot of this nowadays about, especially older folks, baby boomers, are lonely. People are lonely. And they want to hang out with other people. They want to see young people running around. Do malls pay attention to that there may be a psychosocial function a cultural function beyond commercial, beyond retail, and beyond just sort of going ice skating, as it were. Although that sounds like fun.
No, I think it's innate. I think it's already there. It's not something we go to the office and discuss, like how can we make this. But when we do think about redeveloping or our malls and the center court space, we do think about what element might be the gathering feature. What is it? Is it the fountain? Is it an ice rink? Is it something? Those ideas do filter into our redevelopments and the way we think about things. So, yes.
In a word.
So what about, we've seen international malls. I mean, there are different ideas for malls. You'd mentioned that the people come over and go to Florida and they buy a lot of stuff and take it home or ship it home.
Yep.
Are there other malls that have special uses, maybe for international businesses, or are there malls for children? Are there malls, not children shoppers, but for children's stores?
Yeah.
I'm just kind of curious if it's gotten into that kind of specialization, or is the diversity its strength, the strength in itself?
I think that the latter, the diversity, is the strength. You can, all your customers can find what they want. One store isn't for everybody, but there's one store for everyone, what they would want. But we react. We know our customers well. We study our demographics and who's there and why, and when we try to react to make the environment of the mall aligned with their expectations and what their desires are.
When you talk about the environment of the mall, you're speaking not only the selection of stores, but also the architecture or the...
Yeah, sure. I had nothing to do with it. It happened before I joined the company, but Keystone is a good example where it needed a refresh. It needed a new look. It needed a new face.
Sure.
The center court space.
The bazaar.
But there was an enormous.
Do you remember the bazaar?
No, I did. I was around, but I was not around then.
Just a side note: some of our listeners may not remember. Keystone of the Crossing, before it became Keystone of the Crossing, was the bazaar, and it was
like wasn't it a wood structure?
Oh,
yeah,
and it was split level, so
unintelligible to people's spatial orientation. More people got confused and mixed up and lost.
Well, that's the point.
Crazy.
Get them lost so they stay longer.
Well, maybe so. Good point.
It was a good piece of property,
but when Keystone,
poorly conceived.
When they redid it, you could go in there today and you witness this, but there was a very deliberate attempt to bring natural light in, to make it feel much brighter and much more, welcoming than it was before. It was pretty dark and quiet, and with all the light wells that they dropped in, made a huge difference. And so it doesn't come without a decent amount of investment, but that's paying attention, I think, to the environment, the space in between.
Have there been malls that were so beloved because of their design, because of the architecture, that people didn't want to see them change? Looking for protected status.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know of any situations
like that. We haven't found one yet.
Yeah.
Well, we talk about Glendale, and Glendale was designed by Victor Gruen in 1963.
Sure.
And he was largely credited as one of the godfathers of mall design. This sort of thing that I suppose if you were truly enthusiastic about the history of the American mall from an architectural preservation point of view, people might say, don't tear down Victor's design. I mean, it's long gone at this point. But
sure.
Has that ever been an issue for you folks?
I can't think of a situation where, its architectural status won over its need to perform.
Well, the Circle Center Mall downtown, a lot of that was mandated by historic preservation, but that had nothing to do with the inside.
Yeah, that was a very public-private partnership. That was something that the community got behind. It wasn't just an initiative of a mall developer building a mall. It was there to support the convention center. It was there to encourage people to move back downtown and live downtown because you had a place to shop. Yeah, and connect to the hotels, give people something to do after 5 o'clock, or a place to go for lunch. Before that was built, we had nothing. But the survivability of that, when you have multiple malls in the periphery and where the people are already living,
it had a good run.
Yeah.
I mean, I was always told that it was supported really by the convention business. I mean, meaning people from out of town.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot of that. I have some ties to the convention center with my wife. Used to be there. Did sales and tourism for the convention center, and then there was always something about that when they were bringing a potential group to see the city, to sell the convention center, there was always a kind of hey, look at this, we've got this amenity, and as well. So it was always helpful.
Is the way to look at downtown retail? I mean, we've gone through, traditionally, Ayers Blocks, Strauss, all these companies
Hmm.
that lasted for 80 years at
Hmm.
least have gone away. And then we got the Circle Center Mall, and it's being revisioned. What should downtown have as retail?
Like the Coke plant, the redevelopment of that. That's a really good redevelopment opportunity that they seized and have done quite well with. I'm fortunate to live close enough to walk there on a regular basis, but that retail is much more like the old city retail, where the storefronts are the street, and there's obviously enough interest and willingness to have a store there for them to have the number of stores that they have in that. And I think they're going to do something similar to Circle Center, a little bit more outward facing, and maybe.
Yeah, everybody wants to know what's going to happen with Circle Center.
I haven't seen anything for a couple of years, 3 years before it.
All right.
Last time it was in the IBJ, but I think the intent is to kind of recreate the outdoor space and forego the interior mall concept.
Really? It's interesting. Well,
Yeah.
is it not the nature of downtowns everywhere to come and go, to expand and contract, and there's always a new solution, and these solutions are all sort of predicated on the idea that downtown will always be downtown, which sounds like something that you might have told me in 1955. We're going to go downtown to get your new clothes for school, Stevie. But is the whole notion of what a downtown is that evolving, transmogrifying? What do you?
Certainly. 1980s, there was nothing to do downtown except go to your office. So I think we've seen a huge shift of our downtown, and Detroit's gone through a similar transformation where people want to live downtown, they want to work downtown, they want to eat out. There's certain critical mass, right? If you don't have enough housing downtown, you're not going to survive as a retail. If you don't have enough retail, your housing's not going to do well. So they kind of inch up together, and I've seen consistent growth in both of those in our downtown. And similarly, most urban markets are seeing the same thing.
The work that you're doing, I mean, are you in the middle of some other urban areas?
For what it's worth, most of the Simon malls are in,
Yeah.
similar positioned in markets like the Keystones are. On the periphery, on the loop, in suburban markets, and so no, not a lot of
Expect
a lot of urban infill. But what we're doing is creating an urban environment that was 100% mall. When a developer developed that farmland in 1970s, the code was basically written to be a mall. So, how tall do you need to be? 60 feet. Okay, that's how high you can be. You're going to be all retail. Okay, retail only. You're going to have parking. Okay, this is your ratio. And so when we go to do these projects, 100% of the time it's a rezoning.
Right. And if you have a 3-story Sears,
How do you put a 7-story hotel there?
right, got the whole parking requirement,
Yeah.
which is antiquated probably too. And yeah, how do you reconfigure that property?
So we find,
Highest and best use.
I'd say, for the most part, most municipalities are forward thinking and see what we want to do, what we want to do different, how we want to rewrite the code to say, oh, hotel's available, or hotel's allowable use, office allowable use. When we ask for these things to be changed, most of the times the municipalities are more than welcome to help us and approve that because they want to see the mall survive, and they know that if we're losing a retail anchor and we can put new other asset classes there that help the mall, but also create more density at the same time, they're willing and able to see that as a benefit. So we have a favorable argument to make when we go in for rezoning these properties.
Do you think malls are likely to expand with new kinds of partnerships? I think of museums. At some point, somebody said, let's put a museum in a mall that'll bring people in, or let's put a school, let's put a university, let's put a mall in the middle of a university. A lot of times, student unions are kind of prototypic seeds of malls.
Sure. The food court.
Yeah.
If it makes financial sense, then yes. We do have some universities that have satellite offices or satellite.
Right.
Yeah, they used to teach in Glendale basement.
Right.
Yeah.
Plugged into ours. So yeah, I mean, it happens. I don't know that you're going to talk to very many mall developers that are philanthropic and say, oh, here's 100,000 square feet. for free. That's
No.
that. But certainly, I mean, the Mall of America, I don't know, that's probably now 20 years old. I mean, it's basically an amusement park in a mall. So you can put just about anything in there if the community is attracted to it.
What doesn't work?
Every situation is case by case, and when we have a piece of real estate, if there's not enough need for retail and we're looking at other uses, a hotel may not make sense at that location sometimes, or residential may not make sense, or office may not make sense. But retail is always an evolution. There's just as many new brands as the ones you've forgotten.
Are you less likely to build out the new retail space in a way that it can't be changed later? In other words, do you try and build in flexibility, understanding that people come and go? And
there's some pretty basic standards that retailers look for.
But Lifetime Fitness, they're going to want a big.
Yeah, Lifetime's a little bit different. Dick's is a little bit different. The big boxes, they're kind of the medium boxes replacing. So we put in Lifetimes where we've had a Sears. We've had a Sears close in our Orange County in Brea, and we're doing a redevelopment there. And it's probably a third of the retail space that was the Sears. But now we have a Lifetime, we have a Dick's, and I've got 377 apartments going in starting now.
Who is renting those apartments?
I would say you just treat it as like a market rate. It's a desirable location.
Are you young professionals, young families, retired people?
We've got a lot of, so Brea, for example, there's almost no new development for the last 10 years. So there's one other multifamily housing project that went in a couple of years ago, but there's just far more demand than there is supply. So we're a very attractive option for folks. I mean, you're talking about a market where a small 2-bedroom house is $1 million. So it becomes maybe the only choice for many people, but we're still building to the highest quality in the market.
Can you look forward 50 years to a point where Simon is a residential company more so than a retail company? Or no, you're never going to change the DNA?
Well, we are a REIT, but frankly, I could work 20 more years and develop all the property we can, and I probably still wouldn't move the needle.
And a REIT is a real estate investment trust,
correct?
Which puts certain constraints on what you can think about doing, or no, it opens more doors than not?
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to speak to the details of it, but when you create a REIT, you have a very disciplined and narrow bandwidth of what you do.
Okay.
And so it's retail
Right.
real estate for Simon.
If you're going to do that, you don't start doing hotels. And
we could work as hard as we could for the next 10, 15 years and probably still not create more than 5% of the company's revenue. I mean, it's just the size of our company as it is today.
Has the onslaught of the online retailing changed your business, changed your strategy? Or it's sort of, nobody knew what to do with it 15 years ago, but now we figured it out and we do just fine with it. How has the Amazon phenomenon, as it were?
I mean, it exists. It has affected brick and mortar, the malls. Maybe that's why there's not 5 in every market. There's maybe 3. From my perspective, and again, very naive in terms of the retail component of these things, we've seen sort of the course correction and feel very good about our position.
So there may have been some uncertainty 10, 15 years ago, but it's been resolved.
Yeah, I would invite anybody to listen to any of the earnings calls and listen to David's perspective on this. I think we have best in class the real estate in almost all the markets we're in. So it's an enviable position.
And you folks are still the number one mall developer, certainly in the country, possibly the world?
We have international development as well, our ownership. We have recently developed ground up malls or centers around the world, but I doubt seriously you would see Simon, break ground on very many new sites in the United States for a new mall. Now, that said, we do bring premium outlets is one of our asset classes, and we're doing new development in that in the United States. But again, retail's not my forte.
Well, I know years ago, Simon did announce some partnerships and things in Europe or in other parts of the world, and I didn't know if that still was a priority. Or
there's been partnerships, there's been acquisitions, dispositions. Over the 30 years of the REIT's lifespan, there's been a great deal of movement.
But would you say the United States is still specialized in the sense that, I mean, this whole industry hasn't become generic, where the same thing that you would do in Madrid, Spain, you would do?
Any business, any developer is nimble, and they do what what's appropriate in that market. And
even McDonald's has, Indian McDonald's and
sure.
the Delhi airport.
Yeah.
Do you see the most of mall development and redevelopment going on in established places as opposed to new places?
Yeah, for sure.
Because
I mean,
is it redevelopment?
It's redevelopment. Yeah.
You're taking old sites that are zoned.
Sure. I mean, the city may relax their parking requirements or just abandon them and said, you know what? We're not going to tell you how many parking spaces. That's for you to figure out and make sure that you have them when your customers come. When we get those opportunities, when land frees itself up, we look for what can we put there that generates revenue.
Do you have a design aesthetic that is necessarily flexible and fluid so that when you redevelop a mall, let's say in Chicago, it's going to look different than the one in Tucson?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's just like any other architecture. You're going to be contextual. At least I would hope that the architects and the owners and developers would be. But yeah, there's reaction to the environment you're in, and in many cases, the city you're dealing with might have strong feelings and requirements, so you have to meet their expectations. Like I said, I do development of hotels and residential, and as an example, we put a brand new residence in at our Seattle property, opened up earlier this year, and you can just go to Marriott and take the prototype and say, there it is. We're going to do this many keys to this many floors, and it's going to look like the prototype. But we took the approach that this is a mixed-use development, that we want to raise the bar. So all the architecture, whether it's the residential buildings that are under construction right now or the hotel that opened this year or the next hotel, there's an element of, sort of appropriateness to be in this mixed-use environment and level of quality materials, how you connect to the rest of the world around you. It's not just an island. It's not just a 2.5 acre parcel on an exit on the freeway.
A lot of landscaping.
A streetscape. There's the same bench in all 45 acres. There's the same street light. There's a new aesthetic. And so we build these things and we create a new fabric, if you will, that runs through the entire redevelopment project. So, we're opportunistic and I'd say we raise the bar as high as we can.
Do you work with local architects, the person who designs I'm just making this up. So
I don't know. No, it's a great question. In hotel development, there are certain firms that work in almost every state, and they're very comfortable working in the Marriott world, if you will. So they know what works and doesn't work with the brands or the franchises, and they know how they go together. Because there's a really expensive way to build the same thing. You wouldn't know it differently on the outside. And then there's a more economical way, which is, just over time, after you've done your 40th hotel, you know certain things about how to do it effectively and efficiently without compromising quality. There'll be architects that we will look at from a national perspective to say, they know us, we know them. We're going to build another hotel. I'm going to go to the same architect based in Chicago to do my project in Seattle. But they have an office there. So I have somebody that can go to the city and speak to them from that firm, if you will. But I know the designer setting in Chicago, and interior designers in Minneapolis, as an example. And conversely, there's also a huge benefit in doing the regional search and finding the architects that understand the market. There's a certain Seattle architecture. There's certain expectations the city has. And if you don't have that local plugged in architect or design firms, you can run around circles and never get to the end game because you don't understand what the city's actually asking for. It's not like black and white. You can read it. It's more subjectivity. So that's in the case of the residential, we used a local architect to do our design there. At the same time, I designed 2 hotels with an architect in Chicago, as I mentioned. So it's both. Probably 100% of the time we would use a local civil, the trades that are, specific to a local structural, because the nuances that how cities interpret seismic requirements or whatever.
So when you say civil, you're talking about civil engineering.
Civil engineering, yes. So we use a local firm almost every single time for civil engineering.
And as many local architects would remind you that they know the people in City Hall.
Yeah.
They can pick up the phone and say, Bill, it's Jake.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. I'd say the hotel is just unique. It's hard to find somebody in every market that understands hotel construction and design. And in every situation, whether it's retail, residential, hotel, or office, our standard MO is to go out and do requests for proposal and do a competitive process to select our design teams. There's not an automatic, hey, we're going to do a hotel again, so you're going to get it again. It's generally never like that.
Do you look for opportunities, let's say, every hotel room has got 3 or 4 framed pictures on the wall.
Yeah.
Are these,
Yeah.
by local artists? Are these at least?
I would say this goes back a little bit. So when I was with Buckingham Companies here in Indianapolis, there was the owner, Brad Chambers, had a very, very strong interest in connecting the design or the environment we were creating to an art component would be a very strong link. And then the second one is, what's the narrative? What's the history? So as an example, part of the mixed-use development in downtown Indianapolis on Eli Lilly's ground. Before that, it was a community park. Then it was a train parking lot, essentially, for materials coming and going from Lilly. And then it was a human parking lot with 14 acres of cars parked on it. So we did a deep dive, like what does it mean to be in this part of the city? And so just an example, we called the hotel, it was a boutique hotel, non-branded, and we called it the Alexander because Alexander Ralston was the architect of the city of Indianapolis.
I never knew that was your thinking. That's great.
We would weave these little things in and give the people something to, oh, really? And then now your residents or your hotel guests are starting to tell your story for you.
And people may not remember that Alexander Ralston was the architect / city planner, whoever he was, who first laid out the site of Indianapolis back in the 1816, 17, 18, whenever that happened.
It was 200 years ago.
Yeah.
And then so we had a really cool bar at the upstairs over the restaurant space of the hotel. We ultimately named it Plat 99 because if you looked at the original city map, that was Plat 99. That was the square that we built it on, right?
Dang.
And then we went to the trouble of like more examples of the same project, but when we were digging on the site, we found these enormous blocks of limestone, and they were the foundations for the train sheds. So we pulled them and set them aside, and we repurposed them. They became the walls in the plaza. They became part of the new landscape. We brought that history back so that there was more fabric, more to talk about. Railroad rails. If you go sit at the bar at Plat 99, your feet are sitting on a rail that was dug up on the site. If you go out into the plaza, you'll see built into the sidewalks, the old rails are exposed just at the surface.
I've never read anything about any of this. Did you guys get any kind of coverage in the local media? This is very laudable.
We did. I don't know that there was that much sort of retelling the story in the news or in the media, but it's a great hook. If you can talk to your customers and you can explain, well, that's why that's there. They start to sort of get it. We did a high rise down in Nashville, Tennessee, the last few years that I was there. So finished at 16, 17. It's on the corner of Vanderbilt campus. And so, when you give something a name, it's like easy to say, easy to write, easy to repeat. We called it the Aertson, Aerston. It's like, what in the world is that? Why would you do that? Well, Aertson was Cornelius Vanderbilt's grandfather that came over, the first immigrant of the family, and that was his name. And so I would talk to people in Nashville after we built it. They're like, what's the Aertson? What's that mean? And I'd tell them the story, and they're like, I've lived here 40 years. I never knew that. So it's giving this sort of hook, if you will. That's why I enjoy what I do and the way I do it, because I was in an environment like Buckingham and where that was encouraged, that type of reaction and, application of, retelling stories or infusing not just brick and mortar, but stories.
All right. That's great.
I always enjoyed talking about what I do because when you say, real estate development, it may not mean as much and cover as wide of, spectrum as I've been able to apply or be involved in, whether it's selection of the art for the lobby or it's the storytelling that's woven in, or it's the, influencing. I gave up being the architect 20 plus years ago, but I'm still touching the design and influencing that in a way that I think it's meaningful, and it's personally meaningful for me that I get to be able to still do that. It's been a fun ride. I think I've probably built 4,000 apartments, 40 hotels in the last 25 years.
Now, do you find when you go on vacation, it's like a busman's holiday. You can't say, look what they did with the molding up there. It could have been better.
None of us, any design-minded individual can't help themselves, right?
That's right.
Thank you so much. This is great, informative and interesting.
Yeah, thanks, Scott.
I appreciate it.
If you have suggestions or comments about this episode, contact us at talkdesignminded@gmail.com.